he's given probably over a dozen interviews over the last 2 days, and he's said contradictory things in almost every single interview. So there is a missing piece. What is contradictory? Contradictory is saying one thing in one interview and another.
No, give me an example.
Oh, Scott, you want one example of Trump contradicting himself? It's like asking to pick your favorite grain of sand on a beach. We are going to give you exactly what you asked for.
He said, we want regime change, we don't want regime change. He said, we know the people that were going to replace the Ayatollah. Then he said, we killed the people who replaced the Ayatollah, so we don't know them. He said, we want the people of Iran to rise up and free themselves and fight the regime. And then he said, we're happy to work with the regime remnants if somebody emerges from the rubble.
He said that this could be over in 2 days, and then the next day he said it would
be over in 2 days.
3 to 4 weeks.
Guys, he
literally said every single option.
Here's the point. Here's the point.
It's a total mess.
There's been contradictory statements, not just from the president, but from the Secretary of State, from the Vice President, from the Secretary of Defense, about what the objectives really were here and why the American people should support this. And I just would ask, if we are going to be in a 4-week or longer conflict, even if it's 4 days, why not go to the American people and get the vote? If this is popular, if this is supported, get the vote.
It's not just Trump being Trump. The Vice President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the entire national security leadership of the United States is publicly contradicting each other in real time during an active military conflict with a nuclear adjacent country in the Middle East. And even if they did have their story straight, this war was never going to be popular. Americans are exhausted of going to war. We have had 20 plus years of Middle East entanglements, trillions of taxpayer dollars gone, thousands of lives. No one wants another war. And certainly Trump's own kids aren't gonna be the ones paying the price for this. You know they're not gonna be the ones getting drafted. The boots on the ground will be other people's children, always. In any other administration, any of these contradictions would be a 5-alarm scandal. A congressional hearing, maybe even a resignation. But here is just Tuesday, just the normal background noise of a government that has absolutely no idea what it's doing. Staffed by people whose only qualification is just being loyal enough to a man who has no idea what he's doing as president.
You have a looming, potentially larger war in the Middle East with Iran. You're the vice president. How does the Trump administration handle what could be a massive you know, Mid-East war, right? You know, after everything obviously we just talked about like getting America back on track and figuring out how to allocate resources to people in this country. How do we handle that?
Well, I mean, a couple of principles, right? So obviously, you know, Israel has the right to defend itself, but America's interest is sometimes going to be distinct. Like sometimes we're going to have overlapping interests and sometimes we're going to have distinct interests. And our interest, I think, very much is in not going to war with Iran, right? It would be a huge distraction of resources. It would be massively expensive to our country.
That was J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, the guy who is literally right now helping run this war, explaining why this war is a bad idea. A war with Iran is a massive distraction. It is enormously expensive. It is against American interests. It's just spineless. This is a man who looked at his own analysis, filed it away, and then the moment Trump decided that we actually are gonna bomb Iran, Vance was right there at the podium nodding along like he'd never said any of it. And this is who J.D. Vance is. This isn't new. This is the guy who called Trump America's Hitler in private, but then spent years auditioning to be his vice president. This is the guy who built his entire political brand on being authentic, tell it like it is, voice of the working class, and then told the working class that the war he literally warned them about is actually great. Trust me. But he's not gonna pay the price of the war. The rest of us are. But let's see what he has to say now that Trump does want to go to war.
I certainly empathize with Americans who are exhausted after 25 years of foreign entanglements in the Middle East. I understand the concern, but the difference is that back then we had dumb presidents, and now we have a president who actually knows how to accomplish America's national security objectives.
What is different about President Trump, and it's frankly different about both Republicans and Democrats of the past, is that he's not going to let his country go to war unless there's a clearly defined objective. He's defined that objective as Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon and has to commit long-term to never trying to rebuild their nuclear capability. It's pretty clear, it's pretty simple, and I think that means that we're not going to get into the problems that we've had with Iraq and Afghanistan.
Trump is smart? That's the answer? 25 years of Middle East catastrophe, and the secret ingredient we were missing the whole time was just a guy who's not dumb. Okay. And then the second clip, he says we need a clearly defined objective. Okay, I mean, we just spent 5 minutes watching the president say he wants regime change. Then he doesn't. Then he knows who will replace the Ayatollah. Then he doesn't. Then the war ends in 2 days. Then 5 weeks. Then 3 days. That is the opposite of a clearly defined objective. That is a man who cannot finish a sentence without contradicting it. And while Vance is out here promising clear objectives and no endless wars, Trump himself said in a Truth Social post that wars can be fought forever and very successfully. We don't know how long this is gonna last. We don't know what happens to Iran after. We don't know what success even looks like. And given that the people running this thing can't agree on a single answer to any of those questions for more than 48 hours, we shouldn't expect any clarity anytime soon. The only thing that's been clearly defined here is that nobody in charge has any idea what they're doing.
This is an experiment that America has tried and failed for decades and decades and decades. Under Bush, who he worked for, under Obama, Trump promised to be different, but it is not different. He is continuing to make the same mistake of thinking that just because you remove the bad guy, everything is magically solved. Didn't work with Gaddafi, it got worse. Didn't work with Saddam Hussein, it got worse. You can't just remove the bad guy with no backup plan to build long-lasting institutions. And from everything we've seen from this administration, they have no plan. They have no plan on what's going to happen next. They have no transition plan. I don't think they know. They took out most of the people they were going to replace the supreme leader with. And now Marco Rubio contradicts Donald Trump. Donald Trump contradicts himself. Senator Markwayne Mullin doesn't seem to know what the word war even means.
The assumption that the problem is just the guy at the top, that if you remove him, freedom and stability magically bloom, is one of the most expensive and deadly foreign policy mistakes that Republican presidents continue to make. Iran is not a simple case. It is a country of 90 million people with one of the most complex political structures in the region. You can't just unplug it. What happens the day after? I mean, who fills the vacuum? Nobody in this administration has answered any of these questions. They can't agree on whether they want regime change this week, whether they want regime change at all, let alone what a stable post-regime Iran actually looks like.
J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard weren't in the administration, they'd be on that same side. They'd be saying, focus at home. America first is about what's going on here. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard basically left the Democratic Party because of this, saying that Hillary Clinton was going to get us into these useless wars. We heard that in 2024 in the election, too, that Donald Trump is the peace president and Kamala Harris is the one who's going to take us down these routes. She even called it properly. She talked about what he was going to do to the economy and that he was going to take us into war with Iran. If you go back to 2012, Trump is even tweeting about how Obama's poll numbers are so bad he's going to launch a strike on Libya or Iran. And Stephen Miller also tweeting before the election that because Liz Cheney was Kamala's top advisor, which I don't think is true anyway, Liz wants to invade the whole Middle East. Kamala equals World War III. Trump equals peace.
Tulsi Gabbard built her brand on one thing: anti-interventionism. She literally left the Democratic Party because of it. She made a career out of warning that the foreign policy establishment was going to drag America into another Middle Eastern war. That was her whole thing. And now she's director of national intelligence in the administration that just started another war in the Middle East. Vance, same story. He says, focus on home, stop the foreign entanglements, America first. Where is that mentality now?
J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard work for Donald Trump now. They just work for him. They subverted everything they've ever said publicly that they believed, and they serve a commander-in-chief who made the decision to do precisely what they publicly built their political identities around and warned against. It is an epic, a generational stabbing in the back, not just for those officials who've been made to look like fools, and that's being kind, but for the American people, again, who Trump continues to make fools of.
MSNBC clip nails the real victim here. Yeah, Tulsi and Vance look like fools. Yeah, they torch their own credibility, but they're gonna be fine. They have jobs, they have security details, they have proximity to power. They will land somewhere. They always do. And the thing is, nobody forced them into these jobs. They looked at their own convictions, the beliefs that they had built their entire political identities around, and they made a calculated decision that power was worth more. However, the real victims, the people who actually got stabbed in the back, are the voters who believed them. Here's what MAGA contradictions actually tell us. It's so much more than hypocrisy, it is deliberate. This is a movement that thinks its voters will accept anything, as long as it comes wrapped up in the correct culture war packaging. And that's what makes the Iran situation so much more dangerous. The contradictions literally don't matter to this administration. Trump can say the war ends in 2 days, and then 5 weeks, and then 3 days, and nobody in his circle will demand an answer. Look at who Trump has surrounded himself with. I mean, these are not people who are going to walk into the Oval Office and say, sir, you said 3 different things today, and we need to get our story straight. That is not the job description anymore. The job description is loyalty. Total, unconditional loyalty. You don't get to stay in the circle by telling Trump he's wrong. You get to stay in it by nodding, by going on television and defending whatever he said today, even if he directly contradicted whatever he said this morning, even if it contradicts what you said this morning. In a functional national security apparatus, there are people in the room whose entire job is to tell the president uncomfortable truths, to say this plan has a problem, or this intelligence doesn't support that, or if we do this, here is what happens next. Those people, however, get fired in this administration, or they learn very quickly to keep their mouths shut. So what's left is a room full of people who tell Trump only what he wants to hear, which is how you end up with a president who thinks wars can be fought forever and nobody pushes back. So what do you do with that? I mean, it's a terrible situation to be in, but you do what you're doing now. You watch these clips, you keep the receipts, you make sure that when this is over, however it ends, wherever it ends, whenever it ends, nobody gets to pretend that they didn't say what they said. They were wrong, they knew they were wrong, and the people paying for it aren't them. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.